Like, yalla,
Good
come
morning.
on.
We're sitting here?
Good morning, yes. How are you? Welcome. You
I'm
just
very
flew in,
good.
I think.
Thank you very much.
So, thank you so much for joining us today. Just how many people here are based in Saudi Arabia? Do we have anyone from the kingdom in the audience? Okay, one couple of hands. And how many people frequently do business in Saudi, whether that's investing or... Okay, so a few. So by the end of this, our job is to try and convince people, more people to do business in Saudi Arabia and learn a bit more about everything that's going on in the kingdom. So maybe we start with the bigger picture and Saudi's Vision 2030. Tell me a bit more about that, and is it, or how is it more than just a slogan or a tagline? How are you seeing it being implemented on the ground in the kingdom?
I mean, first of all, good morning, and thank you for having me. It's an ever-evolving project of transformation. We've always looked at Vision 2030 as more of development of the infrastructure. It's much deeper than that. It is actually addressing the mindset of the local Saudi. It is preparing them for a very massive transformation, which is social, political, economic, every facet. Before Vision 2030, literally there was non-existence of a lot of industries, including tourism, entertainment, and a host of many industries. And today we see that as one of the most thriving industry that is literally driving the economics of Saudi. Saudi last year reported 8.7% growth, and for the first time it surpassed over $1 trillion in GDP. I mean, that did not come out of thin air. It came out of most of these pillars of Vision 2030, which was more or less galvanized by the vision of His Highness and what he saw in Saudi 2030, what he saw in Saudi being transformed as an economic powerhouse.
Can I just interrupt you for a second there? From that 1 trillion, how much was driven by petrochemicals and the oil industry?
Still, I mean, carbohydrate and oil and gas constitute the majority of it. But what we see that diminishing or more or less being reduced slightly. I can't really pinpoint, but I would definitely see oil and gas constituting close to 50%, if not less than that slightly. But there is definitely a drive, even though that we have been really trying to overcome a lot of these hurdles in really opening up and changing the general perception of what Saudi was and what Saudi is today. That's a very challenging task, and it's not very easy when a lot of people have already pictured you as that country of the 80s and the 90s. And what we're seeing today, we're seeing tourism. You know, Visit Saudi is probably one of the most brilliant projects that was ever introduced by the Ministry of Tourism. We as residents of Riyadh, we're feeling that change with traffic that we have never seen in our lifetime, of the influx of so many people into the metropolitan cities within the kingdom. All of these are testimony and evidence of the plan that was laid out. I'm not saying that everything is perfect. You know, the way it was led, it's always been trial and errors. But the best way to lead a plan and execute is to have more of a dynamic approach to it rather than a static one. And it's always been ever evolving because you're always evaluating the milestones that you set for yourself on achieving that benchmark that you wanted. To simplify, Vision 2030 is driven by indexes. Indexes in ease of doing business, index in tourism, index in entertainment, index in technology penetration, index in so many things. So if you want to measure literally the success of how much we have achieved so far when it came to Vision 2030, you go to the world indexes and you see where Saudi used to be, you know, post or pre-Vision 2030 and where we are today. And we have really strided and achieved a very, very impressive milestone in achieving these indexes. Bear in mind, when the plan was introduced, you had to deal with an accumulation of a lot of stagnation that has really crippled a lot of the areas where we saw growth could ever stem from. And centrally, it was always been oil and gas, and diversifying away from that has been probably one of the most paramount achievement of where we are today. And yet, we're what, 6 years, 7 years within our plan? Normally, it takes decades, literally decades, for countries to achieve these milestone achievements and these transformations. I mean, when you have the political will and the way and the means, definitely you can always achieve it. And, you know, it's this, I call it this resurrection of patriotic euphoria. And that's what the brilliant behind it is. He really galvanized everyone around a single theme, a single narrative that really got everyone. I mean, the country is being built by its own people. It is being driven by its own people. It is spearheaded by its own people. So you're not really trying to import anything. You're not looking for traffic. You're really building everything within that country, and you're introducing it on a world scale.
So, and I love that patriotic euphoria. Because this community, most people in this room are largely investors, let's look at it a bit from the investor's perspective. You mentioned a number of new industries now springing up, and in actual fact, like that sort of stagnation can be a positive thing in many senses because you don't have any of these legacy systems, right? So you can really start from scratch, which isn't always a bad thing. But for investors, what are some of the best opportunities that you're seeing in the Saudi market, and what is the best way for them to access the market?
Well, I mean, I gotta speak for ourselves. I mean, we're in private equity, so we're a fund manager. We manage close to $1 billion across different strategies within private debt within the Middle East and Africa. Our practice is basically divided in different specialties, including private debt, trade finance, distribution of CLO, and also mezzanine. We're also introducing our carbon credit fund later this year. And we're very much invested in VC. I mean, the second largest, most funded market within the MENA when it comes to startups, it's Saudi Arabia. I mean, when you look at the landscape of all the investment opportunities, whether we're talking about funds, you're looking at a volume of over $500 billion when it comes to fund management, divided into different areas, whether it's private equity, mutual funds, etc. And when you look at the VC, it is a very dynamic market. I mean, I'll just give you an example when it comes to VC, and I've spoken on several occasions about where strategically the Saudi market is positioned vis-a-vis all the other markets is one, it gives you scalability. Two, it gives you access to capital and growth. So you look at most of these companies that are prone to accelerated growth, that can only happen in that market. So we've seen that with many companies that debuted on the parallel market, which is the small index market. And today they are unicorns valued at minimum $3 billion. What that market gives you, it gives you the ability to scale and really equitize that really upside where you see, where you could really access the market. When you look around, there's small, the public equities market around us is quite small, and it doesn't really allow for that wide bandwidth where it gives you. This is where you see investment. There's always been an upside. You know, we have today 3 transactions, which we call single transaction funds or drawdown funds, where what we do is we look at specific companies within, you know, within the realm of fintech, any areas within the startups, and we look at, you know, how we could accelerate that growth by really converting a long hold into a short hold or a medium hold, which very much varies within, you know, the area of 3 years to 4 years, and we accelerate that growth to take it public on the parallel market. So what we see today, the waiting list of a lot of these companies, both on the main market tadawul, you're talking about 6 months to a year. All of these companies are interested in debuting, is accessing that capital. There's always been seasons. When is the right time to go public? When is the, you know, so it's, you always need to time everything. When you look at, generally speaking, you know, other areas of industries, the opportunities are enormous when it comes to entertainment, tourism. We've been literally been in various discussions on setting up specific funds that really addresses areas within hospitality, for instance. And we've always kept, you know, a very conservative stand towards not really moving into anything that is not within our specific areas. But when you have a lot of investors and saying, no, we want to access these opportunities, but we want to go, we don't want to go at it alone. We want to go through a specific pool of investors where we could access these particular investments. When you look at today what Saudi Arabia has introduced, which is a project called Sharik, which is the partnership between the PIF or the government and the private sector. It is a very interesting project which allows for most of these companies to reinvest in the country by also getting that needed capital from the government to invest and co-invest with them in many projects. So what you see today represented by PIF is a very, very, very active players within the Saudi market. I mean, just 3 days ago, PIF introduced Riyadh Air. A lot of people were asking, what is this? I mean, you'll be surprised. They've earmarked over $100 billion for it. So far, they've spent and committed $25 billion just to purchase the first batch of aircrafts. I would bet in less than 5 years, you're going to be seeing an airline that is going to be really making Qatar Airways and Emirates run for their money. Why? It's competitive. It is going to reach everywhere. And that's how aggressive they are. So what you're seeing is a beautiful competition between all the countries. You can look at it as fierce competition, but you can look at it as more of an integral part of where I can see my growth. So if I am residing, or I have my business in UAE. I tell you, and I've said it to a lot of people, in that country, they don't like to be remote managed. Unless you have boots on the ground there, it is going to be very difficult for you really to access the projects, because people want to see you investing in that market. So I've always recommended and I've always advised companies that are based here and they have their business out of Dubai or Abu Dhabi, to really set up shop there and really move into the market. The opportunities are endless, and you can see it. You don't want to be on the receiving end of some of these opportunities. You want to be really in the middle of it. So this is how you react to and be proactive when it comes to specific market intricacies and the nuance of that market, because it springs out, and by the time that you get the news, it's already done. Everyone has bidded on it. So it is very important that you have really more your fingers on the pulse of the market and being very close and visible. And I see a lot of companies that used to call Dubai or Abu Dhabi home. They moved actually their second headquarters there, and they're thriving amazingly.
And you think that's from both the investor side, but also the, say, investment management side, asset management side? So to actually attract capital as well, it's helpful?
I think it's both ways. Right now, I don't have the exact date, but before the end of this year, KFD, which is King Abdullah Financial Center, is going to be introducing its offshore regime law. So basically, you're going to have another offshore jurisdiction aside from ADGM and the other jurisdictions. So you're going to be seeing. I mean, we have some setups here in ADGM, in Cayman, and elsewhere. So for me in Saudi, I'll say, you know what? I'll set up my SVP or any of my funds offshore on KFD. So you're going to be seeing a lot of those moving into that market. It's really accessing, because even accessing that capital, that needed capital, you still need to be present. I mean, we've hosted, and you were very kind to be part of that event. We hosted the family office investment forum in Saudi, and the overwhelming majority of most of the people, they really want to see that money invested locally. They want to see it invested locally. Because they see the opportunity. They see the pressure and the margin compression on most of the markets elsewhere, whether it's in Europe or in North America, and that is not yielding what they're targeting. So they see more opportunities in Saudi. So I think, yes, I mean, when you look comparisonly to other areas and other markets around us, yes, we still need a lot of work when it comes to regulations. You and I, we spoke about some of the areas of digital assets and so on and so forth. But I think that pace is being accelerated to a certain extent. Why? Because you see more dynamic lawmakers within Saudi, especially within the central bank, where they see taking that long wait and wait and see type of approach is no longer feasible at this point in time.
And actually, it's interesting you mentioned that. I think digital assets is one of those areas where the blank slate is helpful. We saw this with ADGM as well. They were really able to create an environment that was regulatory friendly rather than having legacy regulation or arguing about it. I think it's a very interesting part of the competitive landscape where Saudi might.
Well, I definitely can foresee within the next short span of time of more regulation, more visible regulations that is happening when it comes to digital assets. I mean, we have a very active sandbox. I mean, you know, we're investing in several fintechs that have graduated from these sandbox in specific areas within the open banking industry in Saudi. We're very much also invested in a lot of companies within the region that really interested in moving to Saudi. I mean, I've always used this this approach, this slogan, outward investment with a Saudi angle. So you put that money, but you really attract them to soft land in the Saudi market, scale, etc. I mean, we see a lot of companies from North Africa, even from UAE. Why? Because they can see the scalability bandwidth that can really help them accelerate that growth. And what is yet to come is much more than what has already have happened. I think pushing a lot of these transformation and development and these key projects. I mean, Riyadh is no longer the same city that I knew 5 years ago. I mean, it has changed dramatically, and we see that changes happening on a daily basis with us being residents. I mean, sometimes you're caught off guard and you don't know what's happening, and you're trying to understand, where is this massive transformation, this growth is coming, and you see it's very much systematic within the grand scheme of the plan. Certain areas within that city are part of a much bigger component. You talk about Neom, you talk about Giddiya, you talk about the Red Sea. These are some of the more famous high-profile projects, but there is a lot. I mean, especially one of the urban development projects, which is Al Murabba, that is going to transform the face of Riyadh. Riyadh today stands around close to 9 million. Within the next 10 years, you're looking at an influx of almost close to 16 million inhabitants. And that's a huge number.
Yeah, and I know you're putting in the physical and digital infrastructure there, and to make sure that that infrastructure can actually cope, obviously, for such a high increase in the population. We do have time for, I do want to touch on more on the venture capital ecosystem as well, but I did want to check to see if there were any questions from the audience, because I don't want to ignore anyone if they do have a question. No, fabulous. Then on the venture capital side, just to touch on that before we wrap up, one thing that's really impressed me in my journeys out there is how much that ecosystem is growing. And when I say ecosystem, I mean true ecosystem, right? You've got the entrepreneurs, you've got the incubators, you've got the accelerators. What are you seeing in that space, and where do you think some of the gaps might be from the venture side? And again, how could investors access that?
Well, I mean, I've always had specific reservations when it comes to valuations. I've always thought valuation was a bit too high. We're seeing that level off to a certain extent with more corrections in the market. I mean, whether you're talking about the Saudi VC market or generally speaking about the region, I mean, we haven't even reached the J curve when it comes to the lifespan of this industry. It's quite short. We're still a nascent market, but a very dynamic and very thriving one. So looking forward and looking where at the market is today, it is quite an active market. We see more funding coming from different entities. I call them VC development funds, such as Ejada, such as SVC. These are some of the entities within. However, what is very surprisingly is we're seeing very traditional family offices that has always been overweight real estate, overweight public equities, are starting to allocate for VC. So very much we're targeting these even in some of our capital raising, where 3 years ago, they wouldn't even entertain a VC deck at all. And you're seeing that happening. Why? Because what they see is that the opportunities within VC and the upside that is happening right and left really more or less looks in comparison vis-a-vis the risk that they would take as an opportunity not to miss. However, we see the tickets are not within the world standard when it comes to minimum ticket of VC investment. But that's a very good thing where today we're not excluding family offices from our fundraising campaign when it comes to some of the VC opportunities that we market. And that is a lot has to do with the market internally within Saudi. We're seeing it very active. The debut of Jahez, for example, I mean, that was one of the highlights of the last 2 years. And actually, it was a year ago. I mean, they just completed the year on Numu, on the parallel market. And it was very much a success by far. And we're seeing a lot of companies really trying to emulate, if not achieve that same target. And a lot of the family offices that we know really want to jump on these opportunities. And I think there's enormous amount of opportunity even for outside investors. We're working with many investors within the region, and they're very keen on accessing the markets, whether through a co-investment. So we always help them, set up a co-investment structure with other family offices, whether they're clubbing investments or even coming in within a specific fund that we set up. So yes, there is the opportunities. We're not looking at anything, I mean, aside from our exposure to Africa when it comes to private debt, but that's a different operation. Our turf has always been the Saudi market, and we see our success and everything that we generate, at least for the next 5-10 years, is going to come from that market.
No, certainly club deals is something that is becoming more and more popular in the family office world, and I know we're touching on that later today as well. So final question then, what would be your advice in 1.5 minutes to anyone that is thinking about setting up in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I mean, I know we have our shortcomings, but not all of us. I mean, it's. I think engaging with that market, being part of that market, making the leap. You got to pivot. You can always, you can always daydream, and you can always talk, and you can say I'm going to do this, but unless you push yourself out of your comfort zone and you really make that leap, and try to invest time. Don't do these stunt trips, in and out. I mean, you got to go and really engage with the people. I mean, I came, because you asked me, and I have to get on a plane after 2 hours because we have 3 events that is happening tomorrow, and it's such a crowded market in Saudi. There's so much going on. It is very difficult to stay away from that market more than 24 hours. So, but I will always do it for you. But I would advise anyone, if you're really genuinely interested in making that investment or really being part of that growth in Saudi, you have to engage more into the market. And us and many other companies that operates within the Saudi market are very active when it comes to introducing new opportunities, showcasing that, and definitely, I mean, that would be my my one advice, is really to engage more into that market.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I didn't realize you were only here for 2 hours, so really appreciate you taking the time to come today. And you've certainly always been very helpful with me in the Saudi market, so
You're
I
very
appreciate you
welcome.
as well.
Thank you. It's my
So,
pleasure.
Round of applause for Essam, Albakr.
Thank you.